hopeless, humiliated, broken. Please, don't let him tie me again. The first thing Elias Boone heard that summer morning was the voice of a girl begging a stranger not to hurt her. She was 16. Her wrists were tied high above her head to a thick pine branch. Her feet were pulled apart and bound with ranch rope, forcing her to stand helpless in the dry yellow grass. Dust clung to her torn dress. The Arizona sun hung high over Tonto Basin, hot and merciless. Silas had said the heat would burn the bad luck out of her. That was how he explained it to himself. Not cruelty and not madness, the lesson. It was not the first time Silas had punished her that way. Only the first time someone else had seen it. Elias Boone sat on his horse and looked at her. 49 years old, a knife at his belt. And for one long second, he did nothing. From where Clara Whitmore stood, he looked like the next man about to decide her fate. She stared at him the way frightened animals stare at hunters. Not with hope, with surrender. She had learned something in that yard. Every man who stopped had power over her. Elias slid down from the saddle. He walked toward her without speaking. Clara tried to pull away from the ropes. Her voice trembled. Please, just go. But Elias was already looking at the knots, the kind meant to hold. Behind the cabin. A drunken laugh rolled across the yard. Silas Whitmore, her father. Elias understood the danger instantly. One man. One drunken father. One Colt revolver somewhere nearby. And a girl who could barely stand. Every rancher in this valley knew one rule. You didn't step between a father and his child. A man could earn a feud that way. Sometimes a bullet, too. Elias reached for the knife on his belt. Claire shut her eyes. She thought she knew what came next. The blade flashed in the sunlight. A rope snapped. Her left arm dropped. Her body sagged. Elias caught her before she hit the ground. That was the moment the cabin door burst open. Silas Whitmore stormed out into the yard with a bullwhip in one hand and an old Colt revolver in the other. His eyes burned with whiskey and rage. "Step away from my daughter," he shouted. Claire stumbled behind Elias, shaking. Silas raised the revolver slowly. The whip dangled from his other hand like a snake ready to strike. Elias Boone didn't move, not one step. And in that silent, blazing yard under the Arizona sun, every man there understood something. If Elias stayed where he stood, one of them might not walk away alive. So the question was simple. Would Elias Boone ride away and leave a 16-year-old girl in her father's ropes? Or would he start a fight that could follow them for the rest of their lives? Silas Whitmore pulled the hammer back on the old Colt. But in that hot yard near Tonto Basin, it felt louder than thunder. Claire stood behind Elias, shaken so hard she could barely stay on her feet. The rope still hung from the pine branch above them. One wrist was free, the other still tied. Silas pointed the revolver straight at Elias Boone. "You cut her loose," Silas growled. Elias didn't raise his hands. He didn't step back. He simply stood there like an old fence post that had seen too many storms to fall now. He had seen men like Silas before, men who blamed women, children, and bad weather for the rot inside themselves. Elias had buried enough regret in his life. He was not about to ride past another one. Clara whispered behind him, "Please, just go." But Elias had already made his choice. Silas stepped closer. The bullwhip dragged across the dirt behind him. "You don't know what she is," Silas said. His voice carried the weight of too much whiskey and too many bad years. "She brought death to this ranch." Clara closed her eyes. She had heard those words all her life. Silas kept talking. Her mother died the year she was born. A dozen horses gone the winter after. Cattle sick. Money gone. His finger rested on the trigger. "Everything bad in my life started with that girl." Elias finally spoke. His voice was calm, low, the kind of voice older men use when they are done arguing. "That's not how luck works." Silas laughed, the ugly kind of laugh that comes from a man who stopped believing in anything a long time ago. "You think you know my house?" "No." Elias looked back at the rope still cutting into Clara's wrist. "But I know cruelty when I see it." For a long moment, nobody moved. Even the wind seemed to wait. Then something changed. Silas noticed it too. Clara had stepped closer to Elias. Just half a step, like a frightened animal choosing the only safe shadow it could find. Silas saw it, and the rage in his face hardened. "You want her," Silas spat. "Take her." The words sounded careless, but the eyes behind them promised something darker. "Take her," he repeated. "But remember something." Silas slowly lowered the gun. "You just made yourself my problem." Silas was cruel, but he was not yet ready to swing from a gallows over a girl and a stranger in broad daylight. Then Silas lifted the Colt and fired one shot into the sky. Clara flinched so hard her knees nearly gave way. The horse jerked. The valley went still again. Silas wanted them to remember that sound. Elias cut the last rope from Clara's wrist. She could barely stand, but something had shifted that day in that dusty yard. 3 lives had just crossed a line that could never be walked back. If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, because this story about Elias Boone and Clara Whitmore is only just beginning. By late afternoon, Clara Whitmore was still in Payson, and Silas Whitmore had not come for her yet. That silence bothered Elias Boone more than a threat would have, because men like Silas did not forget. They waited. Elias had taken Clara straight to the small town of Payson. He knew better than that. In a place like this, people talked more than they worked. A grown rancher bringing a frightened young girl into his house would start 100 ugly stories before sunset. So Elias rode straight to the small white church at the edge of town. Behind it stood a modest wooden house where Martha Hale lived. Martha was a widow, kind hands, and the kind of woman every town trusted. When she opened the door and saw Clara's wrist, she didn't ask many questions. She simply said one thing: "Bring the girl inside." Clara slept nearly half a day in Martha's spare room. When she woke, the first thing she did was sit up and panic. For a moment she thought she was still tied to that tree. Martha gently pressed her shoulder. "You are safe here." Clara looked around the small room. Safe. It was a word she had never trusted before. Meanwhile, Elias stepped outside and leaned against the fence near the churchyard. The afternoon sun hung low over Payson. Dust rolled slowly along the street. He knew something was coming. Trouble had a way of traveling faster than horses in places like this. Sure enough, before the sun had finished dropping behind the hills, a man rode into town hard. Deputy Tom Greeley, young, serious, still new enough to the badge that he believed rules could fix most problems. Tom swung down from his horse and looked straight at Elias. "You stepped into a family matter today," Tom said. Elias nodded once. "I did." Tom sighed and rubbed his jaw. "Silas Whitmore rode through town an hour ago." Elias didn't seem surprised. Tom continued. "He was drunk, angry, and telling anyone who would listen that you stole his daughter." The 2 men stood quietly for a moment. Finally, Tom added something that made the air feel heavier. He also said something else. Elias looked at him. Tom spoke slower now. He said he was coming back tonight, and this time he wouldn't be coming alone. Somewhere inside the house, Clara Whitmore was trying to believe she might finally be safe. But Elias Boone had lived long enough to recognize a storm before it arrived. And that night in Payson, Arizona Territory, trouble was already riding toward them. Night came slowly over Payson. Clara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of water in both hands. She had not touched a bite of food. Every small sound made her shoulders tighten. Elias stayed near the front window, watching the dark settle over town. Deputy Tom Greeley stood outside by the hitching rail, trying to look calm in a way only young lawmen do. The kind of calm older men can see through right away. Then the dogs started barking. Not one dog, 3 or 4. All at once. Oh! Elias looked through the window and saw shapes moving at the far end of the street. 3 riders. Silas Whitmore in front. 2 rough-looking men behind him. The kind of fellows a desperate man finds near a saloon when he wants help and does not care what help costs. Tom stepped into the road and raised a hand. Silas kept riding until his horse nearly pushed the deputy backward. Even from the porch, they could smell the whiskey on him. He looked at the church house, then at Elias in the window, and smiled the kind of smile decent men never trust. "This is my daughter," Silas called out. "I came to take her home." Tom told Silas to turn around and sleep off the bottle. One of the hired men laughed. The other man spat into the dirt. Then everything happened fast. Silas swung down from the saddle. One of the other men rushed the porch. Elias opened the door before the man could kick it. The two of them crashed into the railing and went down hard. Fists flew. Tom grabbed Silas by the arm, but Silas tore free and shoved him aside. Inside the house, Clara stood frozen for one terrible second. Then she saw her father coming through the doorway. That old fear rose in her like a hand around the throat. For a second, she was 16 again under that pine tree. Then she saw the whip in his hand, and something in her hardened. She grabbed the iron poker beside the stove and held it with both hands. She was still afraid, but she was tired of being afraid of him. Silas stopped when he saw it. Not because he feared the poker, because for the first time in his life, his daughter was looking back at him without lowering her eyes. Outside, Elias put one of the hired men flat in the dust. Tom had the other pinned against the hitching rail. Silas backed toward the porch, breathing hard, his face dark with rage and shame. He pointed at Clara. "This isn't over," he said. Then he climbed back on his horse and rode off into the Arizona night. The street grew quiet again, but Clara was still holding the poker. And then she told Elias the one thing she had never told anyone. Her mother had hidden something in that house. Something Silas would kill to keep buried. Morning came soft over Payson the next day. Clara Whitmore stood on the porch of Martha Hale's house and watched the sun rise over the dry hills of Arizona Territory. For the first time in many years, she had slept without fear of hearing her father's boots outside the door. But peace never lasts long in places where pride and whiskey rule men's hearts. Later that morning, Elias Boone rode with Clara and Deputy Tom back toward the Whitmore Ranch near Tonto Basin. Tom did not like bringing her there, but Clara was the only one who knew where her mother had hidden the box. Not for revenge, not for a fight. For the truth Clara had finally spoken about the night before. The small wooden house looked the same as always. Clara walked slowly inside. Her hands trembled as she knelt beside the old bed where her mother once slept. For years she'd kept the secret her mother whispered before she died. A small wooden box hidden beneath a loose plank in the floor. Clara lifted the board. The box was still there. Inside were a few folded papers. Old debt notes, a land agreement with Silas Whitmore's name on it, and one unfinished letter written by Clara's mother years earlier. It was not enough to tell the whole story by itself, but it was enough to show that Silas had been lying for years. The ranch had not failed because of bad luck. It had failed because Silas drank too much, gambled too much, and blamed the only person weaker than himself, his own daughter. Deputy Tom read the papers slowly. He nodded once. For the first time, Clara Whitmore had something stronger than fear. She had the truth, but truth has a way of reaching cruel men before the law does. Silas Whitmore came back before noon. He must have known what Clara had found. He stepped through the doorway, smelling of whiskey, sweat, and panic. One hand reached for the papers. The other went for the old Colt at his belt. Clara backed away, and Elias Boone moved first. The two men slammed into the wall beside the bed. The room shook with boots, fists, and splintering wood. Silas clawed for the revolver. Elias knocked him down. That should have been the end of it. But when Silas looked up from the floor and called Clara a curse one more time, something dark broke loose inside Elias. He hit him again. And again. Too many times. Long after the gun had slid away. Long after the danger had passed. Tom had to drag Elias back by the shoulders. Clara stood there staring at the man who had saved her. And for one hard second, even she did not know what to do with what she had just seen. That was the terrible thing. Not that Elias stopped a cruel man, but that rage nearly turned him into one. Silas Whitmore was arrested that same day. By then he was bloodied, beaten, and too weak to fight the cuffs. He was later sent south to Yuma Prison, and the Whitmore Ranch finally went quiet. But the real ending of this story was not about Silas. It was about Clara. Because the most powerful moment in this entire story was not the fight in the yard. It was the moment a girl who had spent years believing she was a curse finally understood something important. She had never been the problem. Sometimes the cruelest lies in life are the ones repeated to us when we are young. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to believe those lies any longer. Clara stayed in Payson. She worked with Martha Hale. She learned to read ledgers. She learned to keep accounts better than most men in Rim country. And slowly the frightened girl Elias once cut down from a pine tree became a strong woman who could choose her own path. Elias Boone remained nearby, not as a savior, just as a quiet man who once chose not to look away when cruelty stood in front of him. And sometimes that's enough to change the direction of someone's life. Stories like this remind me of something simple. Most people we meet are carrying battles we cannot see. A kind word, a moment of courage, or a decision to stand up for someone who cannot stand for themselves. Those small choices can echo for years. If you enjoyed this story, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Also, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is where you are right now. One honest note before we close. This story was gathered from old sources and retold here. A few details were expanded for clarity and storytelling. The images in this video were also created with AI. If it stayed with you, leave me a comment. Your words help me find more stories worth telling.